To have you with us here.
This is truly an unprecedented situation. I want every American to be prepared for the hard days that lie
I have
ahead.
today declared that the coronavirus presents a public health
President Trump
emergency in the United
extends social
States.
distancing guidelines
They're another
through
heavy
April.
week in this country, and tonight is no exception.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. Today, we will be discussing a topic that has been on our minds for 2020, the coronavirus pandemic or COVID-19. Specifically, we will be talking about the linguistic impact of the coronavirus pandemic. My name is Jenny, and I will be the moderator today. And with us, we have three expert panelists who will tell us more about COVID's linguistic impact. Before our panelists begin, I want to first go over the sources that the experts use in their research and data collection. So they consulted coronavirus corpus and COCA, the Corpus of Contemporary American Linguistics.
Let's pause here for a moment to discuss what a corpus actually is. A corpus is a collection of texts, written or spoken, usually stored in a computer database. A corpus can be pretty small, maybe only about 50,000 words, or it can be very large, containing millions. So when we are discussing the coronavirus corpus, or COCA, that is what we're referring to, and this is what we've used in order to gather a large amount of our data.
They also consulted Google Trends, which is used to show Google searches, and also dictionary and encyclopedia entries were looked at, and news sources, and finally tweets. So let's begin with Haegyong. So Haegyong, what did you focus your research on?
Hello. In my research, I picked two different words that are closely related and look at the frequency of the words in corpus and compare the patterns of the frequency. Especially, I focused on the phenomenon that the frequency of one word took over the other word as time goes by. The two words are epidemic and pandemic. Epidemic refers to a disease spreading in a community, while pandemic means the disease prevalent across several countries. That's why pandemic usually comes with the adjective global. Look at the graph. Until early March, epidemic was holding the lead, even though the difference between the two was minimal. However, since then, the frequency of pandemic has grown steeply. During the period between March 1st and March 21st, the number jumped from 5,329 to 69,859. On the contrary, the number for epidemic remains the same or even decreased. Then why it happened? We can find the reason from the day the World Health Organization has declared COVID-19 a global pandemic on March 11th.
Great. Did you find another pair of words that showed a similar pattern?
Yes, let's look at the words stay and travel. The graph is showing almost the same pattern with epidemic and pandemic in terms of stay took over travel on early March. We could interpret this in a way that many people put emphasis on staying at home rather than traveling out of town. Unlike epidemic and pandemic, stay and travel both spiked based on the time when WHO declared pandemic. When we look into the corpus data, we can see why not only stay, but also travel spiked. Among corpus data since March, I brought some sentences and introduced the sentences to you. As you can see, travel was often used with negative verbs such as limit, gave up, and cancel in the sentences. This is why travel also spiked along with the increment of stay during the period.
Great. Thanks, Haegyong, for sharing. So now we will move on to our next expert panelist, Sarah. Sarah, what did you focus your research on?
I looked at words that increased in frequency dramatically over this year. And so the first word that I looked at was social distance or social distancing. And I searched for both of those versions of that by doing social distance with the asterisk. And what I found was that it was used very little in January and February. And then once we hit March, as we can see the headline, controlling coronavirus will mean keeping people apart. And that is when social distancing started to be mentioned more often. And that is where you can see the spike start to go up. And then dramatically, mid-March was the biggest spike here. And then when things were decreasing, we have social distancing substantially varies by income study. And that is where it really started to decrease the usage of social distancing.
Fascinating. Is there a singular word that also increased because of news coverage?
Yes, actually, I looked at the word vaccine and the frequency of usage for that word. And if you look, it was used kind of often back in January and February, which if you'll think was flu season. And then once the pandemic really started to get going, it wasn't talked about very much. But then in July, when Fauci said that the coronavirus vaccine could be available by the end of 2020, it started to be used more often. And then here in September, he warned against premature authorization of a coronavirus vaccine. And so it started to be used even more, but then it dropped off again. But then in November, when the vaccine started to be approved, is when the spike really went up and it became used a lot more often.
Okay, thanks for sharing, Sarah. Okay, so now we'll move on to our next expert panelist, who's also our final expert panelist, Conrad. Conrad, what did you focus your research on?
Hi, yeah, so I focused my research on particular pop culture words, non-academic words that are becoming more and more prevalent throughout quarantine until now. And these words are words you'd see in spoken word contexts and or social media contexts. The three words specifically, well, four that I looked at were to doom scroll or doom scrolling, the verb zoom, so zoom being used as a verb instead of a noun. Further from zoom is to zoom bomb. Zoom bomb refers usually to disrupting somebody else's Zoom.
Paragraphs around even. Did you guys just see Tyler get kidnapped?
And then another noun being maskne. I wanted to look into if there were any common themes as to how these words were being created, these new words, and I wanted to look into the trends to see if these new kinds of words were actually becoming more popular now because of the pandemic, or if they were words that were used before. Maskne is one word that was created through the process of blending, which is a type of word formation in which two or more words are merged into one so that the blended constituents are either clipped or partially overlapped. That can be seen with the second word, the second origin word, that is an acne, where the ac part is removed and then compounded onto mask from maskne. Now going into the second part of the research, which is the trends that we're seeing are they actually showing that this word is becoming more popular after the pandemic? And as you can see on the right, in red is highlighted when the first confirmed case of COVID-19 arrived in the United States. And as you can see, for a good amount of time, 2-3 months maybe, the word actually had no entries in coronavirus corpus until about 421, where it looked like the word became more popular, all the way until 801, where we saw that it was almost 50 instances of the word. So there does seem to be a trend where acne, or maskne that is become more popular ever since the coronavirus. Moving on to the next one, we've got doom scrolling, sort of funny word, which is created through compounding. Not the same as blending, though similar in that they're taking two words and combining them in one sense. Unlike blending, no words are being cut or overlapped, it's just compounding two words. So obviously doom scrolling is doom and then to scroll, doom to doom scroll. And much like maskne, we're seeing a trend where after months, a long time after the first case of COVID-19 arrives in the US officially, we see that the words are becoming more and more common, with actually only this past month it being the most popular, or one of the most popular it's ever been, according to the coronavirus corpus. Finally, we have one more word, which is to zoom, and by extension, to zoom bomb. This underwent a process called denominalization, where a word that used to be a noun is now being used as a verb. However, zoom bomb is not quite, it's the case of compounding like we saw with doom scrolling, whereas it's to zoom and then bomb. Now, if you can see, zoom follows this pattern as well in the top right-hand corner that we saw with doom scrolling and maskne, where it became more popular, which makes sense because more and more people are needing the application to conduct their daily lives. However, in the case of Zoom, you can see that the word actually was used before COVID-19 officially entered the US. So it's not a word that was so created by the pandemic. Instead, it's one that was just heightened in usage by the pandemic. However, Zoom bomb is not like that. Though Zoom bomb is far less common than the other words we've seen, it is one that only became a word after the fact, after COVID became more popular. And so as you can see, only about 1 month ago, now Zoom Bomb has become the most popular that it had ever been. And that was pretty much the nucleus of the work that I got from these 3 words.
Thank you to our expert panelists. I learned a lot from listening to you all. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to our video. I hope you also learned something from us today.